Lawrie Hooper's homework was marked by June Tynwald and he passed with flying colours. The waiting list initiative supported by Tynwald last year appears to have had a significant impact in reducing numbers of people waiting for treatment. Minister Hooper tells us about that initiative and new adoption law changes before moving on to the carers strategy. Julie Edge gave an impassioned speech in support of carers, which we'll hear shortly. But first, Health and Social Care Minister Lawrie Hooper.
Ultimately, the adoption regulations are about turning on the 2021 Adoption Act, which is designed in really simple terms to speed up the adoption process and make sure that the process is focused around the needs of the child who is being adopted or being put up for adoption. That's the key aim of the Act. That's what all these regulations are designed to do. So it's been a phenomenal amount of work that's gone into it, and I'm really pleased to be able to really bring this forward to Tynwald.
Because, of course, what we often see is bills becoming acts of Tynwald, and everyone makes assumptions then that, yes, this is it, that's all sorted. But in many cases, the Act merely provides the framework on which the hard work then has to start, which is all the regulations and orders that make it happen.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's why when we're going through any piece of primary legislation, you have to remember that it will take a lot of time then to bring it in, and this is why when we talk about embedding something in primary law, why is that important? Well, because it is very difficult to change. You don't just have to go through the primary process, you then often have to go through this whole secondary process as well. So the Adoption Act itself was 2021, we're now in 2024, and this is the point where we're able to kind of turn it on almost. So as a piece of legislation, it's something that we really needed. We do need to make sure that when we are going and putting children in this position of adoption, that they're getting certainty around permanence and placement as soon as possible, so they're not stuck in the system for a long period of time. Equally, adoptive families shouldn't be stuck in the system for a long period of time. It's all about trying to speed this thing up and provide much better outcomes then for the children who should be at the heart of all of this.
Another bit of good news from your department was in relation to waiting list, both in terms of the times that people are waiting and the numbers of people that are waiting. It's always encouraging to know that money has been well spent.
Yeah, and I think that's the R&R report, the Restoration and Recovery report, shows that in this case, actually, we said what we were going to set out to try and achieve, which was to reduce the waiting times and waiting lists in these three specialties: ophthalmology, orthopaedics, and some in general surgery. And to say, not only do we want to reduce those, we want to make sure they stay down. And it seems to me, based on what the data we've got and the report that we've published, it shows actually we've achieved that. And I think that's the key message for me. This wasn't just some, let's take some money and throw it at the health service kind of solution. This was around how do we embed better practice? How do we make sure that things are better for everybody? And like I said, at summing up in the debate, this money hasn't just helped those 3,000 people that have had surgeries. It's helped every single person who's gone through one of those pathways since this scheme closed, because they've all gone through a better scheme, they've all gone through a better pathway, they've all had better treatment as a result. So ultimately, I think this is a really good news story. I think the team down at Max Care, working with their partners in Synaptic and all the staff involved, have been absolutely fantastic. The feedback that I've had was reflected by a number of members on the floor as well. Everyone was saying, actually, everything we've heard is positive about this. It's gone really, really well. And so we're now working on what we're calling R&R 3, which should be the final phase of this, which should cover basically all the other things we haven't yet touched. And if we can apply the same process, the same logic to everything else, what you should then see is much more sustainable waiting list across the board at Max Care, rather than just these three areas that we focused on.
And that is the main focus of this, because some people may question, well, why are you stopping this? Surely the time to stop is when you've got the waiting list down to zero, but there's only enough money on the magic money tree, and presumably you have to accept that there will be some level of wait for a number of procedures.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to what the Chief Minister was talking about in his statement yesterday, when he was saying actually the health service we want has to match the health service we're willing to fund. And ultimately, all of these are choices. We could decide to have, like in the UK, an 18-week referral to treatment. That's what we're working towards here. If we want that tomorrow, it'll cost us a lot of money to change where we're at to get us there tomorrow. If we're happy to say, let's get there incrementally, let's get there on a gradual basis, it will be done, but it will probably cost us a lot less money. The flip side, obviously, obviously is then you have people waiting in the intervening period for longer periods of time. So ultimately, you can decide on whatever level of service care you want. Do you want high-level service? Do you want high-quality service? If you do, you do have to pay for it. And so what we're trying to do, what I've been trying to do, is to balance that kind of desire for very low waiting lists and very low waiting times with the financial envelope that we've been given by Tynwald, with I think the expectation, which isn't an unreasonable expectation, I think, of the Manx public, that says you have to be spending money wisely. You can't just be allowing money to be spent with a blank checkbook. It doesn't work like that. So we're trying to thread that needle and to walk that quite fine line. And to be honest, I think with R&R2, I think we've achieved that. And I think with what we're proposing for hopefully R&R3, we'll achieve the same thing. So I think we are walking that careful line between investing in the right way in our services and our local services to make sure that the benefits that we feel aren't going to just disappear. They're going to be embedded, and those benefits will be seen, for years to come.
And R&R3, that includes which areas now?
Basically everything else. So the R&R2 phase covers the cataracts, hips and knees, and some general surgery. We've also, as you'll have seen in July, got some approval from the Transformation Fund to invest in a significant transformation of CAMS, the mental health service, children mental health service. So that's another strand of kind of transformative work that we're doing around, again, focusing on waiting lists and waiting times and how to get those down and keep them down. The R&R3 looks at all your outpatient appointments. It looks at all the elective specialties that weren't covered here, and it looked at some mental health and social work placements as well. So it's a much broader piece. I'm currently in negotiations with Treasury as to what that should look like, and then hopefully I'll be taking that to the Council of Ministers in due course, in line with the Island Plan action that says we should put a business case forward. Ultimately, whether Tynwald supports that or not will be a matter for individual members. It was surprising to see, I think 3 members voted against even receiving the R&R Phase 2 report today, which was quite concerning from my perspective, because, like I say, it has been a huge success. It's been overwhelmingly well received across the board, and I think the report we've published demonstrates that we achieved the objectives we set out to achieve when Mr. Callister brought the motion back in October 22, and shows that it was actually really good value for money, and it was a really effectively run system that has delivered those embedded longer-term benefits. It wasn't just a short, sharp hit to the waiting lists. So ultimately, we'll see what Tynwald thinks if and when I'm able to bring this forward.
Yes, I must say I was puzzled as to why people would vote against receiving a report which on the whole seemed to be very positive. But no doubt I'll get a chance to ask the members at some point. I did record their names. The other item, of course, was in relation to carers, and we heard a very impassioned speech, it's fair to say, from Julie Edge, which drew on her personal experience. And I think from my understanding of things, you probably agreed with a fair bit of what Julie Edge was having to say.
Yeah, Miss Edge had some really interesting comments around the state of care on the island, so not really focused on carers, which was the main aim of the strategy, and the debate we had today was talking around how we support carers better. But a lot of the things that she said were talking about the care system, so how we financially assess people and the issues that causes and the delays and the backlogs and all sorts. And actually she's not wrong, and these are things that I've talked about myself. This is why I launched a consultation on nursing and residential care to say actually there's got to be a better way of doing this. My personal position, as I expressed again in Tynwald, is that we should have a Scottish style free at the point of use system rather than all these financial assessments and thresholds. It's a bit bizarre that we treat care differently to healthcare in that respect, and I think that was the core point Ms Edge was making, is that people often fall between the cracks. People are put under a lot of pressure then, and that's when you do then have an over-reliance on family and friends who were the subject of our carer strategy, because they're stepping in to fill in the gaps that the state for some reason can't provide currently, or isn't currently providing. So it was really good to hear that, actually, to say that I'm not the only one fighting this corner, and it was actually some of the things Ms Edge said were reflective of things that carers have told us directly as well, how sometimes they don't know where to go for support, how accessing that support can be difficult, how sometimes carers don't even recognise that they are a carer. Some people, it's just, well, I'm just a father, I'm just a mother, I'm not a carer. But actually you are. You're doing a lot of those things which really you might get some help for. You might, even if it's just someone to talk to, even if it's just a bit of support. And I think the one thing that went really well today as well was there was a lot of very positive feedback from members around the role of Crossroads, the role of carers in society, and there's a lot of kind of respect, I think, out there. And one of the key things we've tried to do with this strategy is to raise that profile, because most people out there might not be aware that there are so many carers on the island. I mean, the census shows just under 5,000. Mr. Callister quoted some numbers that lead us to think it could be 10 or 12,000. That's a lot of people out there who are caring, and a lot of it goes on under the radar. And sometimes the only way of knowing that there's help out there is to see these things on the radio or on the TV or in the newspapers. Actually, you know what? I recognise myself in some of that, and these are some places that they say I can go to get some help or to talk to someone. Great. If that's the all we can achieve today, I think that's still a big step forwards. Clearly, there's a lot of work to do now driving that carer strategy home and making sure that we actually deliver on the things that we're setting out to achieve.
Mr. Thomas referred to possible privatisation or elements of the service being privatised. I think you gave him a fairly, or the equivalent of a political slap back, and saying that really wasn't what was happening. Do you understand, though, why he might have felt that was the case?
I can understand the concern that actually when you do something like the R&R waiting list initiative and you have to bring in outside resource, actually what assessments are done to make sure that people are getting that care. And I've had this conversation with people. Some people say, well, actually, why don't you just give me the money and I will go and buy the service from someone I like? And actually, that would be privatising. If we were to turn around and say, you know what, there's money here that you can claim personally to go and pay for healthcare, you would essentially be privatising the system. We're not doing that, because what we're doing is saying, actually, it's an NHS service, and quite frankly, as an NHS customer, do I really mind who employs the staff who are dealing with my care? Actually, no, it's all commissioned through Manx Care. Manx Care are the ones in control of that commissioning process, and ultimately these surgeries are done on island in our operating theatres, using a combination of our staff and private staff. And ultimately, it's a single front door from the back end. It really, should it matter if we have to use agency staff? No one would argue that using an employment agency or a nursing agency to substitute some kind of bank workers or part-time staff, nobody would say that is privatising the health service. But the principle is exactly the same. You're saying, well, these guys I don't employ directly, they're employed by a third party, but they're working for the NHS. And I think that's quite key. I've been very clear since day one that I won't support the privatisation of the healthcare system in any way, shape or form. I'm not a fan of, sometimes you hear people say we should start charging for appointments or charging for attendances at A&E, and actually all that stuff is just not acceptable to me. So I do get quite wound up a bit, I think, when people throw these things out as almost like a casual remark, which is kind of what happened today. So yes, I did push back a little bit on some of it, because it does frustrate me that you start to lose the clarity of message then, and people out there get quite worried about what government is doing then with the health service. Actually, are they privatising it? Are they? And the answer to that is absolutely not, and not on my watch, quite simply. And it's just a bit frustrating when people kind of throw some of this terminology around for whatever reason. Maybe it's well intentioned, but I think it is important that to stamp that out quite clearly and say, your NHS is an NHS service. I'm a firm believer in the way that we do things under the NHS. Could it be better? Could it be more efficient? Could it be more cost effective? Absolutely. But ultimately, the idea that we want to sort of privatise chunks of our healthcare system doesn't sit well with me at all.
And I suppose that leads us on to the Chief Minister's statement, in which he has made clear that all the chief officers of the various departments are going to be expected to report back to Council of Ministers with a clarity on how they are going to, or they could potentially become more efficient. Now, often that is seen as code for we're going to have to introduce some cuts somewhere along the line. You though, in what you've just said, do seem to believe that efficiencies can be generated without cutting services.
Honestly, I think it's a mix. I think at some point Tynwald is going to have to make a call. They're going to have to decide on some of this stuff. And if we do want to have high quality, publicly funded services, then they have to be publicly funded. They have to be. But from my perspective, in a ministerial capacity, I'm actually quite comfortable with this, because Manx Care have, since their inception, had a cost improvement programme. And I think I'm right in saying that every year they have over-delivered. So we've set them a target, and they have delivered more efficiencies than they've been asked to deliver. This year's target, I think, is something in the region of 18.7 million. I might be a little bit out there, but it definitely starts with an 18, which represents about 5% of their budget. So the Chief Minister saying all departments need to come forward with a cost improvement and efficiency plan. Manx Care are well ahead of the game on this. We already have that built in, and it is predominantly around doing things differently and doing things better. Some of it is around alignment with UK standards, with best practice. I'm not aware that we're talking about any big changes, any big cuts to services or anything like that. And I don't think that's where we're heading, if I'm honest. I think we are looking at delivering services in a better way. And as I've said many times, things will change. The service you're seeing will change. But what we'll always try and do is make sure that the patient, the service user, is at the heart of that change. So yes, you will see things delivered differently, but the aim is always to make sure it's being delivered better and not worse.
That was Health Minister Lawrie Hooper. Julie Edge gave a powerful and emotional speech during the debate, which we'll hear now.
I'm going to struggle to say this today, honourable members. As a full-time carer, honourable members have stood up and said this is a very good strategy and there's lots of good in it. I'm sure that good has come from Crossroads and Third Sector. Honourable Member for Douglas Central, Mrs Corlett, just picked up on one of the areas I wanted to highlight, and that was, for some reason in this report, we missed out what the current cost would be. We put the year's costs up to a certain point, but not what the current estimation of what carers on this island save the Manx government by caring for people, their loved ones, for their neighbours, for anybody in society. And today's calculation, following on from Mrs Corlett, would be £144 million. Honourable members, you've all said this is a good strategy. And at the end of it, it says, we're investing, as a government, the Caring Island Plan government, £96,000. I find it absolutely disingenuous to every carer on the Isle of Man to invest £96,000. Members have talked about carers wanting recognition. I don't think I've ever met a carer that wants recognition. What they want is help and support from this government. And is there any? Very, very little. I'm fortunate, but some people may say it's unfortunate. But I'm fortunate to have seen both ends of where there is no support or respite for individuals. I have an autistic, non-verbal granddaughter that's broken without support up until very recently, and I applaud Crossroads for what they have achieved and what for PSAC have achieved in getting support for an individual family that was broken. I have elderly parents. I've cared for my mum up until a month or so ago, full-time, at home, with a full-time job in here as a minister. I've witnessed what support is out there. And the first question you ever get asked when you approach any government service is, what money have they got? When you reply and say, my mum was one of the people that survived paying just a married woman's stamp of 100 and gets a pension of £145 a week. Oh no, all our pensioners are very wealthy, honourable members, aren't they? £145 a week. Oh, but she's got a small amount of savings. Because even when my dad went into care last year, they took their money and split it in half like a divorced couple. That's what our government does to our people. And my mum was left with half and a pension of £145 a week. Care starts with the Isle of Man government. The hospital is short of care workers. I'm still, every single day, having to check what care is in place, whether there's enough staff. And here we are investing £96,000 as a carer strategy with very little. I cannot see any tangible outcomes for the people that are currently caring in the short term. Honourable members, you may not be aware, But there was a short breaks review carried out by our government, never been published. It was provided in an FOI, and there's lots of statistics in it about costs and short respite care options for people. And one of the things in there which could be really helpful, and Crossroads are doing their best, but is small breaks, small sessions. It actually suggests that carers could go into people's homes and just give the family a break to go out for 2 or 3 hours. Why is this not mentioned? Why is this not being circulated? There's some brilliant information in there. Did the department not know it existed? I don't know. But certainly it's there, it's available, and I'm happy to share it with any honourable member at the end of this. The voice of the carer is not heard, and it's good to see in there that, hospital discharge, what the situations are around that. Let's see whether a carer's voice is actually heard and supported. It states in here that, as a few members have said, that a lot of this can be done within existing resources. One example is, go to your GP and register as a carer. Are our GPs not under enough pressure and stress? Is that how existing resources are going to be utilised? To gather data, which I think they've probably already got enough of in this document here, but does anybody ever look back at previous strategies, previous documents, previous research before coming forward with a small document saying, look at us, we've got a strategy and we're giving it £96,000, honourable members. I'm speaking from my heart today to try and give people a true understanding of what's not out there for carers. I've worked full time, I've been a minister, I've committed fully to that as well as caring, and I know there's nothing available to anybody. Unless you're the fortunate few that are currently in the system. What about the people that aren't? Crossroads have indicated it. Give Crossroads more money. They're happy to help. Most of the charities are happy to help. But they're relying on charitable donations. Whilst the government saves possibly 144 million at today's estimates from the report back in 2010. Isle of Man government, you can do better. You can look after our carers. You can give them rest breaks. This is what this is, a short breaks review. It's all there. It was all done for you. Have you used it? You haven't. And I'm sorry, but I've seen both ends. And unless we get our complete package of caring and social policy correct, our hospitals adequately staffed with care assistants, where people are not left and then need residential care or nursing home care, all I have seen is complete, not joined up, bringing a strategy out that's going to put extra resources on our doctors by going and registering and make your GP aware and, the support mechanisms. And the one thing that isn't mentioned, and I have looked a few times, but clearly it's an emotional document for me to read, social workers. I don't think they're mentioned, but social workers are a key element of this document. They're a key element of discharge pathways from hospitals. They're a key element with PSAC, with Crossroads, to get people respite care. Social workers' workload is so great, people cannot get into nursing care or residential care because they can't get an assessment. Look at where the problems are starting. They're starting with people being held in hospitals because of the other facilities and structures of government that are not kicking in quick enough, like social workers, because they're so overwhelmed. So many people need them. Look at carers in hospital. Make sure there is enough of them on every ward every day to support our nurses, support our doctors. They're doing an amazing job with little resources, mostly bank workers. I've even seen an agency company working in the hospital this week. I understand the sickness, but all of our frontline services are stretched. Invest where the money's needed, and £96,000, Chief Minister, does not cut it for carers. And I will give you this, I'm happy to give you this document. It was there, it was available, it's got costings in it, and nobody, it appears, has taken any notice of it. Current annual spend on short breaks was, at this point in time, 1.3 million. Additional recommendations, additional annual spend, 1.185 million. And we're looking at, let's gather the information, let's do assessments on carers. Sounds a bit intrusive to me, actually, some of the commentary in there for people. But I think I've said enough. I've given you good examples of what I've witnessed in the last 12 months. And we're not cutting the cloth for carers. We're not actually investing in the right things. We're investing, as the Honourable Lord said yesterday, in giving millions to developers.
That was most of Julie Edge's speech on the carers strategy from June Tynwald. So what do you think? Have you benefited from the waiting list initiative? Do you welcome the efficiencies mentioned by the Minister? Is there any space left for more efficiencies to be found? And what about the island's carers? Should government do more, as both speakers have suggested? And if so, how will that be paid for? Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now, though, I'm Phil Gaughan. Guramayo. Thanks for listening.